Murder at Blackthorn Townhouse, a Nero Wolfe mystery. Good evening, dear listener. Settle into your chair, let the noise of the day fade away, and allow yourself to be drawn into a world where words are weapons, silence is suspicious, and truth is never where it first appears. Tonight's mystery unfolds in the shadowed corridors of power and privilege, in a city that prides itself on logic, yet thrives on deception. This is the world of Nero Wolfe, a man who rarely leaves his home, trusts facts more than people, and believes that every crime, no matter how brutal or carefully concealed, leaves behind a pattern waiting to be exposed. Within the walls of a grand townhouse, among whispered conversations, locked doors, and carefully timed lies, a crime has been committed that will test even Wolfe's formidable intellect. While the great detective remains rooted in his familiar domain, it will fall to sharp observation, relentless questioning, and a mind attuned human weakness to unravel what truly happened, and why. As the case begins, remember this. In a Nero Wolfe mystery, nothing is accidental. Every pause matters. Every word carries weight. And every character has something to hide. So listen closely. The truth is already in motion. The letter that refused to be ignored. The brownstone on West 35th Street had a personality, and, like its owner, it disapproved of disorder. Even the city's noise seemed to pause respectfully before pressing against its walls. Inside, everything moved according to a schedule that did not acknowledge coincidence. At exactly 6 o'clock, Fritz Brenner rang the dinner bell. At exactly 6:02, Nero Wolfe descended the stairs with the gravity of a man who expected the universe to make room for him. And at exactly 6:05, I was late, by design. "You are 2 minutes delinquent, Archie," Wolfe said, settling into his chair as though the wood itself had been designed around his dimensions. "I was building suspense," I replied, taking my seat. "Keeps the appetite sharp." Wolfe snorted, which in his vocabulary translated to, "You are tolerated, not amusing." Dinner proceeded in dignified silence, broken only by Fritz's quiet movements and the occasional clink of silverware. Wolfe ate with concentration, as though nourishment were a task requiring intellectual approval. I watched him the way I always did, half for habit, half because when Wolfe was quiet, trouble usually wasn't far behind. It arrived 10 minutes later. The doorbell rang. That alone was an offense. Visitors were vetted, scheduled, and rarely admitted without advance irritation. Fritz paused. Wolfe frowned. I rose. At the door stood no man, no woman, only an envelope placed precisely at the center of the step, heavy stock, cream-colored, sealed with wax so dark it appeared almost black, though under the hall light it revealed itself as deep green. No name, no return address. That envelope radiated intention. I brought it inside and placed it on Wolfe's desk without comment. He examined it as though it might lunge. "This," Wolfe said finally, "is a provocation." "Or a party invitation," I said. "Though the dress code looks grim." Wolfe did not smile. He slit the envelope carefully and unfolded a single page, typed with clinical neatness. He read it once, then again, then he handed it to me. "Mr. Nero Wolfe, at precisely 10 o'clock tomorrow evening, a man will die inside Kingswell Conservatory. The method will be subtle. The responsibility will be obscured. The truth will be inconvenient. You may uncover it if you choose to involve yourself." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "A scheduled murder," I said. "That's new." "No," Wolfe replied. "What is new is the presumption of my cooperation." "Could be a bluff." "Bluffs do not specify venues," Wolfe said. "They suggest possibilities. This promises certainty." Kingswell Conservatory was not obscure. It was a glass cathedral of wealth and philanthropy, hosting an invitation-only gala the following evening. Donors, trustees, politicians. The sort of place where reputations mattered more than lives. "You're going to ignore it?" I asked. Wolfe leaned back. "Absolutely not." That was Wolfe, for "I will not leave this house, but the world will come to me." The next morning brought confirmation. Inspector Crane arrived before noon, his expression carrying the faint embarrassment of a man who did not like being beaten to his own investigation. "We received a similar message," Crane admitted. "Anonymous. Same location, same time." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "Then the sender is thorough." "You think it's real?" Crane asked. "I think," Wolfe said, "that someone wishes to demonstrate power, and the surest demonstration is follow-through." That evening I went to Kingswell Conservatory in Wolfe's stead. If a death was scheduled, someone had to witness the appointment. The gala shimmered with artificial warmth. Glass walls glowed. Music drifted. Laughter echoed with practiced ease. I counted exits, watched hands, noted glasses being refilled. At precisely 10 o'clock, the lights flickered. Not enough to alarm, just enough to distract. A man collapsed near the central fountain. No blood, no struggle, just a body folded awkwardly, a glass rolling from limp fingers. Screams followed. Then silence. Then chaos. His name was Harold Kingswell, and the letter had been right. A death that wanted witnesses. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the city had begun its nightly ritual of pretending nothing irreversible had occurred. Taxis still honked, windows still glowed, and somewhere a saxophone bled melancholy into the alleyways. Only the faint stiffness in my shoulders reminded me that a man had died exactly as promised. Nero Wolfe listened without interruption. He always did at the beginning. Interruptions were for later, when inaccuracies needed discipline. I described the conservatory in deliberate order. The vaulted glass ceiling, the way light fractured across leaves polished to a near artificial sheen. The clusters of guests, arranged not by friendship, but by advantage. I told him about the lights flickering, clearing its throat, I said again, and about the sound the body made when it struck the marble beside the fountain. A dull, humiliating sound. Death without drama. "When did the glass leave his hand?" Wolfe asked. "Before he fell," I said. "It slipped, like his fingers had forgotten their job." Wolfe nodded once. "Neuromuscular failure. That narrows the list." Inspector Crane arrived before I finished my coffee, his coat still carrying the scent of rain and institutional frustration. He brought facts. Wolfe preferred implications. "Toxicology will take time," Crane said. "No visible trauma, no obvious injection marks. If it's poison, it was elegant." "Elegance," Wolfe replied, "is the refuge of those who wish to be admired." Crane ignored that. "Everyone present had access. Donors, staff, trustees, even a few city officials. Kingswell liked to blur boundaries. Kingswell, Wolfe said, liked to feel indispensable. Crane produced photographs. Kingswell sprawled beside the fountain, eyes open, expression mildly surprised, as though the universe had violated a private agreement. "Who stood nearest?" Wolfe asked. Crane pointed. "A woman to his left, Lydia Heron, trustee, recently resigned." That name lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable. "And to his right," Wolfe continued, "his personal secretary, Malcolm Reeves." Wolfe absorbed this. "A person who manages secrets and a person recently deprived of influence." Crane frowned. "You're not saying—" "I am not saying anything," Wolfe interrupted. "I am observing." After Crane left, Wolfe requested the guest list. He read it as though it were a confession written in code. Names meant nothing to him until they repeated themselves in pattern. "The letter," Wolfe said suddenly. "Did anyone else react before the collapse?" "Yes," I said. "Reeves. He went pale seconds before Kingswell fell." "Fear," Wolfe said. "Or anticipation." That night, the second envelope arrived. Same weight, same green wax. This one was shorter. "You observed the first truth. The second will explain motive. Patience will be rewarded." Wolfe crushed the envelope slowly, not in anger, but in disappointment. "They are attempting to guide me," he said. "That will not end well for them." The following morning, I returned to Kingswell Conservatory under the polite fiction of retrieving Kingswell's personal effects. The staff moved like ghosts, eyes downcast, voices low. Guilt does that, even when it's misplaced. A gardener told me Kingswell had argued earlier in the evening. A heated whisper near the orchid wing. No one heard the words, but the posture had been unmistakable, threats delivered with a smile. In the service corridor, I found something else, a faint citrus scent lingering near a tray cart, long after the glasses had been cleared. Back home, Wolfe listened, eyes closed. "Poison introduced shortly before ingestion," he said. "Not hours, not minutes, seconds." "So someone close." "Close enough to be trusted," Wolfe corrected. "Or invisible." That afternoon, the newspapers shifted tone. No longer a medical incident, now a suspicious death. The letter had accelerated scrutiny, exactly as intended. Another detail surfaced through Crane. Kingswell had quietly amended his will 3 weeks earlier. 2 beneficiaries removed, no replacements added. "A man subtracting enemies," I said. "Or creating them," Wolfe replied. By evening, the pattern sharpened. A public venue, a promised death, a method that relied on proximity and timing. And now, a hint of motive that refused to settle. "This murder," Wolfe said at last, "was not meant to be hidden. It was meant to be seen." "Seen by who?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "By me, and by whoever believes themselves clever enough to challenge inevitability." Outside, the brownstone's windows reflected the city's glow. Glass meeting darkness in 1,000 fractured angles. Somewhere, the killer was watching the same reflections and waiting. The motive that refused to sit still. Nero Wolfe spent the morning doing what he did best, thinking in absolute stillness. From my desk, I watched the ritual unfold. Wolfe seated perfectly upright, hands steepled,
eyes half closed, as though he were listening to a voice no one else could hear. When Wolfe behaved this way, the brownstone itself seemed to lower its volume out of respect. "Archie," he said at last, without opening his eyes, "tell me something obvious." "That's
my specialty," I replied. "Fire away." "Why warn us?" I didn't answer immediately, because the question wasn't rhetorical. It was foundational. "Because they wanted attention," I said finally, "or control, or an audience." "Insufficient," Wolfe said. "Thousands of criminals crave attention. Very few schedule it." He opened his eyes. "The warning is the crime's skeleton key. Without it, Kingswell's death becomes merely another unexplained collapse among the privileged. With it, the death acquires meaning." "So you think the murder wasn't about Kingswell at all?" Wolfe nodded. "Kingswell was expendable. The narrative was not." Inspector Crane arrived with new material before Wolfe could elaborate, carrying a thin folder that looked embarrassed by its own lack of substance. "We confirmed the poison," Crane said. "Synthetic alkaloid, rare, expensive, requires advanced preparation and precise dosage. Too much kills instantly, too little "Leaves no trace." "Which means," Wolfe said, "the killer practiced." Crane hesitated. "There's more. Kingswell wasn't the only one threatened." He slid a photocopy across the desk, another typed letter, same formatting, same phrasing style, different recipient. Malcolm Reeves, Kingswell's personal secretary. "Be punctual. History favors witnesses who survive." Reeves, Crane explained, had received the letter 2 days before the gala. He'd assumed it was extortion. Kingswell had told him to ignore it. "And now?" Wolfe asked. "He's terrified," Crane said, "and cooperative." Wolfe leaned back. "As terror encourages honesty." That afternoon I visited Reeves. He lived in a meticulously tidy apartment that felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for consequences. His voice trembled despite his effort to control it. "Kingswell was cleaning house," Reeves admitted. "Quietly, discreetly, removing people who knew too much or who had begun to question him." "Lydia Heron?" I asked. "Yes. She discovered irregularities, offshore accounts, donations redirected. She threatened exposure." "And you?" Reeves swallowed. "I kept records. He told me it was protection, insurance. Insurance cuts both ways." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened, then asked a question that felt almost gentle. "Did Reeves benefit from Kingswell's death?" "No," I said. "If anything, it ruined him." "Then he is not our killer," Wolfe replied. "Fear does not orchestrate spectacle. Ambition does." That evening, the third envelope arrived. No wax this time, just folded paper slipped through the mail slot like a whisper that didn't want to be heard. "The first death exposed power. The second will expose loyalty. You are closer than you think." Wolfe read it once, then smiled, a small, displeased smile. "They are accelerating," he said, "which suggests insecurity." "You think they didn't expect something?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "they did not expect me." He turned his attention back to the guest list. Names circled now, patterns emerging, overlapping financial interests, quiet alliances, silent resentments. "Kingswell," Wolfe said slowly, "was not merely corrupt. He was central. His death destabilized a structure."
And someone's using that chaos.
Yes, Wolfe said. But chaos is a poor long-term strategy, which means order will follow. I looked at the letter again. The second will expose loyalty. "Who's next?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes hardened. "Someone who will refuse to die quietly." Outside, thunder rolled, slow, deliberate, inevitable. By the fourth day, the case had begun to behave like a living thing. It shifted when touched, resisted simple conclusions, and punished assumptions with quiet cruelty. Nero Wolfe noticed this immediately because Wolfe noticed when logic refused to sit where it was placed. "This investigation," he announced over breakfast, "is being paced." "By us?" I asked. "No," Wolfe replied. "Against us." Inspector Crane arrived with a development that proved Wolfe's point. The woman from the guest list, Lydia Heron, had vanished. Not fled in haste, not disappeared in fear, removed. Her apartment had been emptied with care, no broken drawers, no abandoned documents. Even the dust had been disturbed deliberately, as if someone wanted to ensure no accidental truths survived. "She resigned from the trusteeship," Crane said, "after accusing Kingswell of embezzlement. The accusations were buried. Her reputation wasn't." "And now," Wolfe said, "her existence is inconvenient." Crane stiffened. "You think she's dead?" "No," Wolfe replied. "I think she is preserved, at least for now." That afternoon, Wolfe instructed me to do something rare, retrace rather than pursue. We rebuilt the gala minute by minute. Who arrived when? Who spoke to whom? Who lingered near the fountain? The answers produced something uncomfortable. Kingswell had not been alone. He had been positioned. The fountain was the visual center of the conservatory. Any collapse there guaranteed maximum attention. Any act performed there became impossible to ignore. "The killer," Wolfe said, "did not simply choose a victim. They chose an audience." The phone rang at precisely 4:17. The voice was calm, cultivated, neither male nor female in tone. "You're asking the wrong questions," it said. Wolfe gestured for silence, though the voice was not speaking to me. "On the contrary," Wolfe replied, "I am merely refusing the answers you prefer." A pause, then, "Loyalty is fragile when tested publicly." The line went dead. Wolfe remained still for a long moment. "They are preparing a second act," he said. That evening, another letter arrived, hand-delivered, no envelope. Kingswell believed money created silence. The next truth will prove him wrong. Attached was a photograph, a man bound to a chair, alive, eyes open, fear unmistakable. Malcolm Reeves. My stomach tightened. "They've taken him." "No," Wolfe said quietly. "They have displayed him." Attached to the photograph was a location, Ravenholt Storage Annex. Inspector Crane wanted to move immediately. Wolfe refused. "They want panic," Wolfe said, "and panic produces mistakes, including fatal ones." Instead, Wolfe dictated instructions, phone calls, quiet inquiries, pressure applied where no one expected it. "Whoever orchestrates this," Wolfe explained, "believes loyalty is revealed under threat. They are wrong. Loyalty is revealed under choice." Night settled heavily over the brownstone. Somewhere in the city, Reeves waited, terrified, breathing, and very much alive.
The killer was escalating, and Wolfe was finally ready to answer. Nero Wolfe does not rush. He does
not hurry, accelerate, or succumb to the illusion that speed equals effectiveness. Yet as night deepened over the brownstone, there was a subtle shift in the air, an imperceptible tightening that told me Wolfe had crossed from analysis into commitment. Reeves's photograph lay on the desk between us, his wrists bound, his posture rigid with fear. Alive, yes, but displayed like a thesis statement awaiting rebuttal. "They have made a calculation," Wolfe said at last. "They believe urgency will compromise my judgment." "You going to prove them wrong?" I asked. "I'm going to demonstrate," Wolfe replied, "that their understanding of loyalty is primitive." Inspector Crane did not agree. He wanted movement, sirens, search warrants, men with guns and impatience. "If Reeves dies while we wait," Crane began, "then his death will serve the killer's purpose," Wolfe interrupted, "which is precisely why we will not oblige them." Crane left furious, would return later, chastened. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, loyalty is not proven under coercion. It is proven when defiance costs something." "So what's the cost?" Wolfe's gaze settled on me with a weight I did not like. "Exposure." The Ravenholt storage annex was not a place designed for drama. Concrete corridors, steel doors, rental units stacked like secrets people couldn't quite let go of. If the killer wanted isolation, it was perfect. Instead of going there, Wolfe summoned 3 people to the brownstone. First came Lydia Heron, alive, composed, furious. She arrived under police escort, furious not at the officers, but at the invisible hand that had maneuvered her like a chess piece. "They told me Reeves would die if I didn't disappear," she said. "They said silence would save him." "And did you believe them?" Wolfe asked. "I believed they were serious." Wolfe nodded. "They were. They simply misidentified the variable." Second came a man I hadn't expected. Dr. Samuel Crane, Kingswell's longtime physician. Nervous, defensive, carrying the brittle confidence of someone who had made ethical compromises and convinced himself they were necessary. Third came Eleanor Vance, a junior trustee dismissed months earlier for financial incompetence. Bitter, sharp-eyed, waiting for permission to be angry. Wolfe seated them carefully, arranged, not invited. "Mr. Kingswell," Wolfe began, "maintained power through fear disguised as philanthropy. Each of you participated, willingly or otherwise, in that structure." No one spoke. "The killer," Wolfe continued, "believes loyalty fractures under threat. But that belief requires one assumption, that loyalty exists." Lydia stiffened. "Are you saying it doesn't?" "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that what you mistook for loyalty was dependency." He turned to Dr. Crane. "You adjusted dosages, signed off on medical anomalies. You told yourself you were protecting a benefactor." Crane's face collapsed inward. To Eleanor Vance, "You noticed discrepancies. You were removed." To Lydia, "You threatened exposure. You were silenced." "And to Reeves," Wolfe said quietly, "you recorded everything. Insurance, you called it." Wolfe folded his hands. "The killer has studied these dynamics, but they have misunderstood one thing." "What?" Lydia asked. "None of you are loyal to each other," Wolfe said.
which means Reeves is not leverage. He is proof. The phone rang. Wolfe answered it himself. "You have assembled your witnesses," the voice said calmly. "Good. That saves time." "You misunderstand," Wolfe replied. "I have assembled your audience." Silence. Then, "If you do not come to Ravenholt, Reeves will live," Wolfe said, "because his death would end your narrative. And narratives are all you possess." The line disconnected. Minutes passed. Then another call, this one from
Inspector Crane. "They released him," Crane said. "Reeves was found tied but unharmed, left deliberately."
Wolfe closed his eyes once, briefly.
"Escalation failed," he said, "which means desperation follows."
Lydia leaned forward.
"Then who is doing this?"
Wolfe looked at the photograph again, then set it aside.
"Someone," he said, "who believes exposure is violence."
Outside, the city moved restlessly. The killer had lost control of the pace, and Nero Wolfe had just taken it back. By morning, the brownstone felt less like a residence and more like a courtroom awaiting its most reluctant witness. Even Fritz moved with unusual care, as though the walls themselves might object to careless noise. Nero Wolfe remained at his desk, reviewing notes he did not need, confirming conclusions he had already reached. "Their mistake," Wolfe said without looking up, "was believing control persists after exposure." "You think?"
"They're out of moves?" I asked. "No," Wolfe replied. "I think they are out of good ones." Inspector Crane arrived carrying a fresh report and the unmistakable expression of a man who had just realized he was late to an argument already decided. "Another letter," Crane said. "This one wasn't delivered here." Wolfe's eyebrow rose a fraction. That was as close as he came to surprise. "It was delivered to the Times," Crane continued. "Anonymous, typed. Details of Kingswell's financial misconduct, names, dates, transactions." I let out a low whistle. Public exposure. "Yes," Crane said. "And timed for maximum effect. It prints tomorrow." Wolfe leaned back slowly. "Then the killer has abandoned subtlety." Crane frowned. "You think this is connected to the murder?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "that the murder was the opening argument." The article was thorough, painfully so. It outlined years of quiet corruption, donations rerouted, silence purchased, reputations ruined with polite efficiency. Kingswell, once a pillar of civic virtue, was recast as a spider at the center of a delicate web. Public outrage ignited instantly. Phones rang. Trustees resigned. Donors issued statements thick with regret and thin on responsibility. "Who benefits now?" I asked. Wolfe's fingers steepled. "Someone who believes justice is achieved through humiliation." That afternoon, Wolfe summoned Malcolm Reeves. Reeves arrived pale but determined, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. He had slept poorly, if at all. "You kept records," Wolfe said. "Yes." "Why?" Reeves hesitated. "Because I knew this would end badly. I just didn't know when." "Did you share them?" Reeves shook his head. "Never." Wolfe studied him. "Then someone else did." Reeves's eyes widened. "Lydia?" "No," Wolfe said. "She lacked access. Dr. Crane lacked motive." "Then who?" Reeves asked. Wolfe stood, the movement deliberate and rare. "The killer," he said, "is not exposing Kingswell to punish him. Kingswell is dead. Exposure now serves a different purpose." "To cleanse?" I offered. "No," Wolfe corrected. "To author the narrative." That evening the final letter arrived. No wax, no pretense, just a single sentence. "Truth is not justice until it is seen." Wolfe read it once, then nodded. "They have admitted authorship," he said, "and authors require recognition." He dictated a response to be published, not privately delivered. A formal announcement inviting all remaining trustees, donors, and associates to the brownstone the following evening. A discussion. A reckoning. "A trap?" I asked. "A conclusion," Wolfe replied. Outside, the city buzzed with scandal and speculation. Somewhere within that noise, the killer prepared to take credit, certain that exposure equaled victory. They had underestimated one thing. Nero Wolfe did not argue with narratives. He dismantled them. When the audience arrives, if the killer believed exposure was power, then the brownstone on West 35th Street was about to become the stage they had always wanted, and the one they least understood. The announcement Wolfe dictated ran that morning in quiet columns, nestled between stock movements and civic notices. No accusations, no drama, just an invitation, phrased with Wolfe's unmistakable precision, requesting the presence of several named individuals for the purpose of clarification. Clarification, in Wolfe's vocabulary, was rarely gentle. By late afternoon, the house transformed. Chairs were brought into the office and arranged in a deliberate semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. Not randomly. Wolfe never tolerated randomness. Each seat was placed according to hierarchy, influence, and relevance. Fritz observed silently, understanding without being told that tonight's dinner would be postponed indefinitely. "You expect them all to come?" I asked. Wolfe adjusted his cuffs. "Those with nothing to fear will attend out of curiosity. Those with much to fear will attend out of necessity. Only the guilty hesitate, and hesitation, in this instance, is conspicuous." The first to arrive was Dr. Samuel Crane, his expression drawn tight by a night spent negotiating with conscience. He took his seat without comment, eyes avoiding mine. Next came Eleanor Vance, composed but simmering, the resentment she had carried for months now sharpened into something more purposeful. Lydia Heron arrived third, calm, watchful. She had regained her composure since her forced disappearance, but not her trust. Her eyes scanned the room as if cataloging exits. Malcolm Reeves came next, thinner than before, his portfolio clutched like a life preserver. He nodded to me but said nothing. Finally, Inspector Crane arrived, not as authority, but as witness. Wolfe had insisted. "They must understand," Wolfe had said earlier, "that truth does not fear observation." One chair remained empty. "The author," Wolfe murmured. At precisely 7:30 the doorbell rang. The woman who entered did not look like a killer. She was middle-aged, professionally dressed, unremarkable in the way people who cultivate invisibility often are. Her name, she announced calmly, was Margaret Ellis, Director of Compliance. The room shifted. Ellis had overseen audits for several nonprofit organizations connected to Kingswell's philanthropic empire. She had testified before committees, written reports, issued warnings that vanished quietly into administrative drawers. "You came," Wolfe said. "I was invited," Ellis replied evenly. "And I believe in transparency." Wolfe nodded. "As do I. Please sit." She did, into the final chair directly opposite Wolfe. What followed was not an accusation. Wolfe never accused without first exhausting inevitability. Instead, he began with history. He spoke of Kingswell's structure, how money moved, how silence was purchased, how reputations were managed through carefully applied pressure. He named no criminals, only mechanisms. Faces tightened. Then Wolfe shifted. "The letters," he said, "the warnings, the choreography of fear, these were not acts of vengeance. They were editorial decisions." Ellis remained still. "You did not kill Kingswell in anger," Wolfe continued. "You killed him in punctuation, a period placed at the end of a sentence you believed had gone on too long." Ellis's lips pressed together. "You discovered corruption," Wolfe said. "You documented it. You reported it. And nothing happened." Her voice, when she spoke, was controlled. "Truth without consequence is complicity." "An understandable sentiment," Wolfe replied, "and a dangerous one." He gestured toward Reeves. "You stole copies of his records, used them to construct a narrative where exposure equaled justice." Ellis's eyes flickered, just once. "And the murder?" Inspector Crane asked. Ellis finally looked at him. "Kingswell would never have been exposed alive. His death made denial impossible." Wolfe nodded. "So you authored a spectacle, a public morality play?" "Yes," Ellis said, "because the system protects itself." Wolfe leaned forward, his voice suddenly sharper. "No. You protected your righteousness." The room fell silent. "You selected victims," Wolfe continued, "not for guilt, but for narrative impact. You threatened Reeves not because he deserved death, but because fear would force others to reveal themselves." Ellis exhaled slowly. "I gave people a choice." "No," Wolfe said. "You gave them coercion." Inspector Crane stood. Ellis did not resist. As she was escorted out, she turned once, meeting Wolfe's gaze. "People will still know the truth," she said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "But now they will also know the cost of believing oneself entitled to dispense it." When the door closed, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Eleanor Vance broke the silence. "So what now?" Wolfe leaned back, suddenly looking every bit the weary man again. "Now," he said, "truth will proceed at its own pace, imperfect, but lawful." The audience dispersed quietly, their certainty bruised but intact. Later, as Fritz finally served a late meal, I watched Wolfe sip his coffee. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded once. "Justice is rarely satisfying, Archie, but it is preferable to authorship." Outside, the city exhaled. The spectacle was over. The thing about a spectacle is that it leaves echoes. Even after the audience departs, even after the lights dim and the curtain falls, something lingers in the air, a residue of attention that refuses to dissipate quietly. The brownstone felt like that the morning after Margaret Ellis was taken away. Not relieved, not triumphant, merely altered. Nero Wolfe noticed it immediately. "Closure," he said over breakfast, is a myth perpetuated by those who dislike reflection. You saying this isn't over? I asked. I am saying, Wolfe replied, that consequences rarely respect narrative boundaries. The city did not sleep well that night. News of Ellis's arrest spread quickly, accompanied by a careful but relentless unpacking of Kingswell's corruption. Editorials bloomed, opinions hardened. Some praised Ellis as a reluctant whistleblower driven too far. Others condemned her as a murderer cloaked in moral certainty. Wolfe read none of it. The public, he said, is interested only insofar as outrage flatters its self-image. Inspector Crane arrived mid-morning, exhaustion etched into his posture. Ellis is cooperating, he said. She wants everything out, names, institutions. She insists the exposure continue. Of course she does, Wolfe replied. Authorship is difficult to surrender. Crane hesitated. There's something else. He produced a thin envelope, white this time, ordinary, unsealed. It was delivered to Ellis's office yesterday morning, before the gathering. She never opened it. Wolfe accepted it, his fingers momentarily still. Inside was a single page, typed, familiar cadence. You believe truth absolves method. You are mistaken. There are always footnotes. I felt a chill. She wasn't alone, I said. No, Wolfe agreed quietly. She was the visible hand, not necessarily the only one. That afternoon, Wolfe asked me to do something unexpected. Visit Dr. Crane, he said. Again? Yes. Regret has a way of loosening tongues after applause fades. Crane's office smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. He looked older than he had days before. I didn't help her kill him, he said before I asked. I know, I replied. But you helped him live longer than he deserved. Crane flinched. I signed off on reports, adjusted language, softened findings. I told myself it wasn't my job to dismantle empires. Was it hers? I asked. He didn't answer. Back home, Wolfe absorbed the information with careful detachment. Ellis believed herself solitary, he said. That belief sustained her courage and blinded her. You think someone else pushed her? I think, Wolfe replied, that someone benefited from her visibility. That evening, a final development arrived, not in wax, not in print, but in silence. Lydia Harron withdrew her statements. Eleanor Vance declined interviews. Several trustees settled quietly out of court. The system was healing itself. Wolfe closed his notebook. The tragedy, he said, is not that Ellis failed. What is it then? I asked. That she was unnecessary. Outside, the city resumed its rhythm. The scandal would fade. Another would replace it. But somewhere in the footnotes of a story no one would reread, a warning remained. Justice pursued without restraint does not end injustice. It multiplies it. The weight of knowing. The 9th chapter of any investigation is rarely about discovery. Discovery belongs to beginnings, to the thrill of finding what was hidden, to the satisfaction of patterns emerging from chaos. Chapter 9 is different. Chapter 9 is about endurance, about what remains after certainty has been stripped of romance. Nero Wolfe understood this better than most. He sat at his desk that morning with no papers before him, no notes to revise, no lists to consult. The work of deduction had ended. What remained was judgment,
And Wolfe disliked judgment precisely because it demanded responsibility without offering novelty. "People imagine," he said slowly, "that solving a crime provides relief." I leaned back in my chair. "Doesn't it?" "No," Wolfe replied. "It provides clarity. Relief is a luxury afforded only to those not required to act on that clarity."
Inspector Crane arrived later with what he called final confirmations, though nothing about his tone suggested finality. Margaret Ellis had given a full statement overnight. Not a confession, Ellis resisted that word, but an explanation so thorough it bordered on manifesto. "She insists," Crane said, "that Kingswell's death saved others." "She would," Wolfe replied. "Moral certainty is most persuasive when unchallenged by humility." Crane hesitated. "You still believe she wasn't acting alone?" "I believe," Wolfe corrected, "that she was enabled." The distinction mattered. Ellis had not forged the financial records. She had not created Kingswell's empire of silence. She had merely illuminated it. Violently, yes, but not singularly. Others had known. Others had benefited. Others had chosen safety over truth. "They are relieved," Wolfe said. "Relieved that Ellis can be isolated as an aberration, one villain instead of many accomplices." That afternoon I took a walk through the city, not to investigate, but to listen. The case had seeped into public consciousness in fragmented ways. A headline glimpsed through a cafe window, a debate overheard on a subway platform. Opinions sharpened by distance from consequence. She did what had to be done. No excuse for murder. He got what he deserved. No one mentioned Reeves, or Lydia, or Eleanor. Peripheral characters never survive the edit. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe summoned Lydia Heron one final time. She arrived cautiously, as though expecting accusation. "You will not be charged," Wolfe told her without preamble. "I know," she said. "Ellis made sure of that." "Do you regret your involvement?" Wolfe asked. Lydia considered. "I regret believing exposure required spectacle." Wolfe nodded. "That belief is contagious." After she left, Wolfe asked for coffee and stared at nothing for a long time. "They will call Ellis a monster," he said eventually, "and in doing so, absolve themselves." "You think she deserves more sympathy than that?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "she deserves less certainty." That evening, the city lights flickered outside the windows, glass meeting darkness once again. I thought of Kingswell, of the fountain, of the way his death had been positioned like punctuation in a sentence someone else wanted remembered. "You ever wonder," I asked, "if cases like this change anything?" Wolfe looked at me then, truly looked. "They change us," he said, "which is both their virtue and their danger." Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable but heavy. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, trials, editorials, revisions of memory. But tonight, knowledge pressed down with its full weight, and neither of us slept easily beneath it. After truth. There is a peculiar stillness that follows the end of a long argument. Not the quiet of agreement, but the silence that comes when all the words have finally been exhausted. That was the atmosphere inside the brownstone on the morning after Margaret Ellis's full statement became public record. Nero Wolfe sat at his desk, not reading the newspapers, not annotating reports, not dictating instructions. He was simply present. That alone told me the case had reached its true conclusion, not the legal one, but the philosophical one Wolfe respected far more. Cases, Wolfe said at last, rarely conclude where the law insists they do. I poured coffee for both of us, though Wolfe had not asked. He accepted it with a nod that suggested resignation rather than gratitude. Ellis had confessed fully, not just to administering the poison, but to orchestrating the entire sequence, the letters, the warnings, the timing, the calculated mercy shown to Reeves. She admitted she wanted the murder to be seen, debated, dissected. Exposure was not a side effect, it was the objective. She believed she was correcting a system failure, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, by introducing a greater one. Inspector Crane arrived with the final procedural update. Charges filed, evidence secured, no surprises. He looked relieved, but also older than when the case began. Public opinion split, Crane said. Some see her as a criminal, some as a necessary evil. Public opinion, Wolfe said flatly, is neither a court nor a conscience. Crane hesitated before leaving. You ever worry you could have stopped it? Wolfe did not answer immediately. I was invited, he said finally, not consulted. The distinction matters. After Crane left, the brownstone returned to its normal rhythms. Fritz prepared lunch. The orchids awaited Wolfe's attention. The city resumed its indifference. But something fundamental had shifted. The Kingswell Conservatory reopened quietly weeks later. No gala, no speeches, just glass, plants, and a fountain that no longer drew the eye. Harold Kingswell's name was removed from plaques, donations reassigned, history edited with surgical precision. Lydia Heron moved on. Eleanor Vance found employment far from philanthropy. Malcolm Reeves entered witness protection, not from criminals, but from memory. And Margaret Ellis waited. She will go to prison believing she was right, I said one evening. Yes, Wolfe agreed, which is the most enduring punishment. On the final night of the case, Wolfe surprised me again. He spoke without prompting. Archie, he said, the most dangerous criminals are not those who break laws. They are those who decide laws are optional once morality enters the conversation. You saying she was wrong to expose Kingswell? I am saying, Wolfe replied carefully, that truth pursued without restraint becomes tyranny wearing virtue's mask. He returned to his orchids the next morning, restoring order where it could be controlled. That was Wolfe's answer to chaos, not denial, but containment. As for me, I filed the case away under its proper heading. Solved. Understood. Uncomfortable. Outside, the city moved on. It always does. But somewhere between glass and water, between spectacle and silence, a reminder lingered. Justice does not need an audience, and truth does not require blood. Looking back, do you believe Margaret Ellis was a villain or a warning? Share your final thoughts below. A quiet goodbye. And now, dear listener, our journey with Nero Wolfe comes to a gentle close. Thank you for staying with this story through its twists, its uncomfortable truths, and its moral shadows. Mysteries like this are not only about who committed the crime, but about why we listen, judge, and decide what justice should look like. If this case made you pause, question, or reconsider a detail you thought you understood, then it has done exactly what a great mystery should. If you enjoyed this Nero Wolfe investigation, let me know in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest, and whether you'd like to step into another case soon. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, The most dangerous secrets are the ones we believe justify everything.